In this little session, I'd like to think about learning number facts. In particular, we'll focus on the multiplication tables. This is an area that often causes parents and their teachers and children themselves quite a bit of anxiety, and I've worked with adults who say things like, I was never any good at maths, I never learnt my tables. Now, I want to right from the start separate out a sentence like that. I was never any good at mathematics. Now that doesn't necessarily follow from the end of that sentence, I never learnt my tables, and we'll see why in this session. First of all though, to warm up, I'd like you to memorise some things that are coming, and there will be a test. Here's the first three. Charlie David lives on George Avenue. Charlie George lives on Albert Zoe Avenue. George Ernie lives on Albert Bruno Avenue. But wait, there's more. Charlie David works on Albert Bruno Avenue. Charlie George works on Bruno Albert Avenue. George Ernie works on Charlie Ernie Avenue. Now you can take as long as you like. You can do whatever you need, aside from taking a screenshot. See how you go with the test. Here it comes. Who works on Bruno Albert Avenue? Did you get it? So it was Charlie George. Now this seemingly rather silly thing was put together by Stanislaw Dehaene in his rather fabulous book, The Number Sense, How the Mind Creates Mathematics. Let me look at what he says about this. Learning these twisted lists would certainly be a nightmare, yet they are nothing but addition and multiplication tables in disguise. They were composed by replacing each of the digits 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 by a surname, Zoe, Albert, Bruno, Charlie, David. Home address was substituted for addition and professional address for multiplication. Now in my copying out this quote from the book, I didn't put in the bit where he shows how those translate, and if you want to you can have a little bit of a go at going back and seeing what they were and seeing how they come out to be multiplication and addition. But I think he makes a very powerful point, and he continues. Seen from this unusual angle, arithmetic tables regain for our adult eyes the intrinsic difficulties that they pose for children who first discover them. No wonder we have trouble remembering them. The most amazing thing may well be that we do eventually manage to memorize most of them. Dehaene has also in his book talked about people who have learnt their tables in one language and then move to another country where they've moved and changed language, and so they drop their first language and communicate totally in their new language years later. One of the fascinating things is that when they are asked to recall number facts, they will recall them in that first language. And he makes the point that this is such a difficult task for the brain to do that it's not going to do it twice. And I was talking with a friend of mine who said that made so much sense to her, because her grandmother spoke Gaelic as a child and came to Australia and didn't speak Gaelic after she was maybe 5 or 6, and to her dying day she would go through muttering away in Gaelic to learn to revise her tables or to say what they were. So you might have a similar experience. I think it helps us to put this into perspective, because learning tables is first and foremost a phenomenal memory feat. And there's a nice little quote from Hamlet there. So we remind ourselves with that sprig of rosemary there that learning tables isn't about mathematics, it's about memory. Certainly, it's going to help because the more tables you know, the more you can use them without having to use up your working memory. So they certainly help, but it is a phenomenally difficult task to do. Most learners, though, can learn at least some tables. There are some rare individuals who really do struggle, and it's as much from memory as other issues, but they're in the minority. Most learners can learn at least some tables, and some tables are easier than others. So, if we tackle this from a perspective of helping with memory, it's important to think about how we can use what psychologists have taught us about memory. Don't use songs. I've been in primary classrooms where the children have the same tune on day after day, but they're different tables. So what that does is actually add another layer. If you go back to thinking about Zoe Albert and which streets they were living on, you're adding in now something else to remember because it's a tune that's conflicting with the other information. And if we think about what was so difficult about learning those strange lists, they weren't all different. There were connections, and our brains are designed for connection. If we think about birthday, we might think about cards, cake, parties, streamers, whatever. Our brain, as soon as it hears one word, brings up a whole lot of other connections. So with tables, if we're thinking about 6 times 8, we're also bringing up other connections with 6 and 8, 6 plus 8, 6 minus 8, all sorts of confusing things. So if we add another layer like a tune, and it's the same tune for all the different tables, then it just confounds the problem. A better approach is to look for patterns, focusing in on that aspect of our brain that loves identifying pattern. It loves to notice things, and that helps us to remember. If you're in the primary program, or if you're a primary teacher, you may well be familiar with the way spelling is memorized. Look at the word, cover it, write it down, say it out loud, and then check. You can use a similar one for tables. So have the child look at the tables. So if they're doing their 7 times table, look at them, cover them up, write them out, and say it out loud. Then check to see if they're right. The idea of looking, you're using your vision, writing, you're using kinesthetics, saying it, you're using auditory. It's all trying to use as many senses as you can to connect up these memory tasks. You need to do it often. So if you're wanting to remember something, you need to rehearse it so that it's constantly coming to the fore in your memory. And when I was in the classroom teaching mathematics, I've noticed that my mental computation was much stronger because every hour of the day I was talking about numbers and thinking about them and saying them out loud and talking about how I was approaching it. Because my work is different now, I don't do as much mental computation, and I notice that I'm slower at it. We do need to practice, we need to do it often. One thing we need to do too is when we're memorizing, when we're practicing, when we're learning, we need to reward ourselves and reward children. And we certainly don't want to punish them. And never, never test. There used to be a way of supposed to be teaching your times tables and your other number facts, and I remember the Friday test, the daily 10 they used to be called, and on the Friday we had our school principal who would come down and he would do our tables tests with us, and maybe he didn't come every week, but he seemed like he was always there. He was a terrifying individual. And I also remember the teacher smacking the chalkboard with a big long ruler, and it was a really terrifying experience. And I was not the worst at it, so I think it must have been particularly distressing for many kids in my class. And this has been an area of mathematics research. There are many, many children who develop mathematics anxiety, and it's often from having these timetables tests or the number facts tests or the daily 10 or whatever they're called, and being humiliated for not remembering them. And so if you're in a time of fear, it's going to have great detriment to your memory. So it's going to be worse in trying to remember. And it is something that we really should not do. We should never test. What we want to do is encourage kids to show what they can do and reward them for that. This isn't really a big idea. If you don't know your tables, you can get around it. Certainly, I want to emphasize it does help. So the more tables you know, the easier maths is, and it's easier to do other work. However, you can get around it. So let's not get fixated on it, and let's not allow people to say, I was no good at maths, I never learnt my tables. They can still be good at maths. But let's get it in perspective. Let's look at the multiplication table just as an example. So if we have a look here, we've got 1 up to 10 and down the other side 1 to 10. So if we wanted to look at any particular slot, we would think, well, what's the row multiplied by the column? So what ones do we know? Well, the 1 by 10 is pretty good. That's really easy. 1 by 1 is 1, 1 by 2 is 2, 1 by 3 is 3, 1 by 4 is 4. So, my goodness, look, there's a whole lot that I can already do. And I can also do the down column as well. So there's a mirror image. So that means that I only have to learn half that great big grid because there's a mirror image. I don't need to worry about having to remember. If I know 1, if I know 6 times 2, I know 2 times 6. The 10 times table is also pretty easy. That's one of my favourites, and lots of people like adding 11 on as well because that makes 11. 11's a really easy one and you feel good about it. We used to go up to 12 because before we had the metric system it had a lot of units based around 12, and so we needed to know our 12 times tables. They're not as critical these days, and so usually we just go up to 10. But we can see the white ones there. There are a few left to go, but not that many. We're certainly under half that we still need to learn. 5 times are usually pretty easy once you know your tens, because then you can just, it's an easier one to go 5, 10, 15, 20. You can work your way through. And so a lot of children in particular find the 5 times an easy one to remember after they've done their tens. Now, one of the favourite ones that I have is learning the 9 times table, and that's because I remember my Year 4 teacher teaching us this way, and we thought it was fabulous. So the first thing you need to do is count your fingers, and this is a bit of a fun thing, and if you want to, you can sing along and you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then back again. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have lots of counting songs. And in the early childhood years, you need to sing a lot in your classrooms. And we have a lot of counting songs that focus on the fingers. There is one of these astonishing things that all over the world, it is known that children learn to count on their fingers. There is a possibility that the part of the brain where we connect our fingers with counting is in the same place. Now, it could be coincidental, or it could be that there's a connection. and it's certainly worth taking advantage of. One of the things that we do notice though is that children do drop the use of their fingers, and counting on their fingers would be considered an immature strategy. So if a learner is still using their fingers to count in the upper years of primary school, it can be an indicator that there are some underlying issues. It's not to say it's bad. I think most of us at certain times will find ourselves counting on our fingers. And my husband had a finger amputated, and one of the funny things that he kept getting the days wrong. He was counting up some days, and then suddenly he realised he was missing a finger. And so our brain has an image of what our hands look like, and if you lose a finger late in life or in your middle age, it's a bit of an issue. Anyway, we've counted our fingers. We know that we've got 10 there, unless you're my husband, and we know how we're going to number them. So we're going across from the left. We've got 1, 2, 3. So we've got them there. And now we're going to do 3 by 9. So take your third finger, that's the one on the left hand side, and turn it down. Isn't my animation amazing? It took me hours and it's still hopeless. It's one of those things that you can look at that and think, geez, I could do a better job. I'm sure you could. Alright, so you've turned your third finger down. On the left you have 2 fingers, and they're coloured in red just so that you can be clear of what I'm talking about. You've got 2 fingers on the left. Now they represent the tens. So that's 2 lots of 10 or 20. You've got 7 fingers then to the right of that finger that's turned down, and I've coloured them in green. So you've got 5 on the right hand, and you've got another 2. So you've got 7 fingers. So if you put that together, that makes 27. The answer to 3 by 9. Now, can you imagine when I was in year 4 how wonderful that was? And I can still remember Gary Bruce Broomfield sitting down towards the back, and every time in our times tables test we'd have a 9 times, he'd go, I've got it! And we were all excited. So this was a really lovely way of helping us to remember our 9 times table. So let's have another one. 4 by 9. So if we turn over the 4th finger, we can see we've got 3 fingers on the left, so that's 3 tens, and we've got 6 units, so that means it's 36. Now this is a wonderful little puzzle to think, why does it work? What's this about? Does it work for any others? Why does it have to be the 9 times table? And you can have a little play with that and have a think about it before I tell you the answer, which can be like the butler did it. Anyway, here we go. Beforehand, so if we go back to the other one, it was 3, we were doing 3 by 9, and we had 2 fingers on the left. Well, now we've moved over 1, and so that's really like adding on 10 and taking off 1. So if you're adding on 9, it's the same as adding 10, taking off 1. So that means we've got 1 extra finger to the left, so it's now 30, and we've got 1 less in the units, so it's now 36. If you're looking at the pattern through the 9 times table, you probably already noticed that when you're a child that the units, the tens column increased by 1 and the units column decreased by 1. And so we can do that on our fingers. And the Romani people in Europe did an enormous amount of calculation on their fingers, and that can be something that you might like to look up and learn more about. I'll just go back. It's actually the 7 times that's the hardest, and it's the hardest because there aren't any patterns. It can be a really difficult table to learn, but you don't have many to learn, and you can get a lot of you've already, for example, we already would know 7 times 9 is 63. We could do it on our fingers to check, and therefore we know 9 times 7, we know 7 times 9. So there's a lot of those that are going to go, but it is one of those that can be a real challenge. So that can be one that you just practice over and over until you know it. We need to encourage our learners. We've got to help to keep the task in perspective. If you just look at a great big grid, you can just think, oh, I don't know my tables. Whereas actually, there are tables they will know, and you can remind them that you know those tables, even if it's just the 1 times table. Great, well done, you know those. Let's keep going. It shows that you can do this. So you need to keep practicing. Like I was saying before, it's a memory feat. We've got to keep it right up the top there. Now, Monopoly has that focus on doubles. So if you get doubles, you get another turn, you get another lot of doubles, and then you go to jail. So it's doubles are a big deal in Monopoly, and it's a very quick way to do it. Well, Monopoly takes forever, of course, but it is one of those things that you're not actually sitting down doing it in a tedious way. And that's why games are great, because you get a lot of practice, but you do it in a way that is enjoyable. So, as we get to the end of this, I want you to remember that learning tables is an amazing memory feat. Keep that in mind. And yet we can do it. Our memories do cope. We can help most learners to do this too, and they will have ongoing benefits for their mathematics.